Hello, Year 11. I thought I'd get the party started by just giving you a really brief overview of how I deconstructed this stimulus with my class. It's by no means comprehensive, and you should spend some more time engaging with the stimulus, and your class teacher will go over this stimulus with you a little bit more. But the most important parts that you need to notice are writing an imaginative response, which includes a central character. So it includes it. That doesn't mean that you are just writing as a character description. You also have to be able to establish a setting and a clear narrative within the imaginative response. Who learns to process complications in their world. To get along with, I think the idea of learn means that the character actually has to come to this realization. It's not just something that happens instantaneously for them. You need to give them some sort of arc in which they're learning how to process the complications in their world. It doesn't just happen, it actually needs to be a learned response. The next key word that I would like to bring your attention to is the idea of processing. And when you think about processing, it's not necessarily about overcoming, but it's about working through. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the central character has to overcome the complications in their world. It just means that they have to get to a point where they are living with the complications in their world. So you can go either route there, because processing doesn't necessarily mean that they get to the end. And this can be big complications, this can be small complications, and you need to think about whether it's going to be complications that are in the world, that are exterior to the character, or are they internal? Are they a part of the character that they have to process and they have to think about how they are going to deal with that complication that is a part of themselves? It's internal. And when we talk about the idea of their world, that word there is going to have an impact on the narrative voice that you choose, because we should be starting to experience the world through your central character's eyes. So whether that is in first person or in third person. The first dot point is composes an effective and sustained imaginative response for a specific audience and purpose. The idea of effective when we talk about imaginative writing means that we actually want to read on with your work. And that's probably the best way to explain it. And that can be for a variety of reasons. That can be because the writing style that you've employed is particularly interesting. That could be because you have played around with the narrative structure so that we are curious about what's going to happen next. But an effective imaginative story really should engage the audience in wanting to know what happens next. Get them interested in the character. Develop a little bit of empathy with that character and how they are experiencing the world. Allow us to experience the world that they are experiencing by using language forms and features that we will talk about in the next point. Sustained means that interest, it keeps going on throughout your story. So it's not just that you are constructing a particularly effective introduction. It means that is continually going on throughout the story, and that narrative voice that you're establishing keeps on going, and you aren't shifting between tenses, and you are sustaining the voice and the story that you are telling and keeping the audience gripped. So if we have a look between the A and the B dot point for that criteria, the only thing that's missing from the B is the idea of effective. So you can compose a sustained imaginative response where you do keep the flow of writing going and it's cohesive and everything fits together, but it might be a little bit predictable, or we might not necessarily empathize with the character, or we might not necessarily be able to experience that world that you're trying to create. So that's what the difference looks like between an A and a B. When we have a look down in a C range, we compose an imaginative response for a specific audience and purpose. So we are just thinking about having an audience and purpose, but we may slip out of that narrative voice and we may slip away from that stimulus, the purpose that we are writing for, a little bit. The second criteria is demonstrates an imaginative and effective use of a variety of language forms and features to create a character and setting. So these are things like your figurative language, similarly, sensory imagery where you're engaging our senses in order to create a description. Think about particular adjectives and adverbs that you are using to create mood and atmosphere, and that is what comes into the next dot point, but it very much influences this one. There is a relationship between all of the different dot points. So when we talk about the next one, it selects meaningful vocab skillfully to create and sustain mood and tone. That means that the world that you are creating, you are picking words to describe that world that actually allow us to experience the atmosphere. And we've talked about this a lot through War Photographer and Beyond the Walls. We have a look at a lot of words that deal with connotation, that evoke a certain mood. We want to see that you're doing that in your own writing. And when we talk about the next one down, it selects a range of vocabulary to create mood and tone. So these words aren't necessarily as considered, but you are attempting to use particular descriptive words to create a mood and a tone, but they might not necessarily be the most well thought out. And the way you're going to move from them not being well thought out up to meaningful vocab choices is going to be through the drafting process. It's going to be about asking your peers or asking your teacher, is this word particularly effective in creating a mood and a tone that I'm trying to achieve? The last point is highly effective editing, evident through syntax, punctuation, and grammar. That means that the work is not coming with no paragraphing. That means that the work is not coming with all simple sentences. You need to think about how you can vary a sentence length around. I've been talking with my class about structural features of text and how authors manipulate us through how they have ordered their sentences and how long their sentences are and how they've used punctuation. This is a piece that's submittable, so it really should not be coming in with any mistakes as far as your punctuation, as far as your grammar. Spell check. Ask other people to do it for you. What moves us down? Effective editing, evident through syntax, punctuation, and grammar. So that is really minor. When we get down to a C, it's editing, evident through syntax, punctuation, and grammar. So you can edit it, but there still might be mistakes within it. So try and polish the piece as much as you can before you submit it in order to satisfy that last dot point. I will let Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Lankowski get on to have a talk to you now about the Viva Voce and the relationship between considering what's going on with these marking guidelines and what I've asked you to be doing in order to meet them effectively, and how you can use that to speak in your Viva Voce interview.
Okay, so the Viva Voce part, you're going to be coming up to your interview in the library with Miss Patterson or myself, Mrs. Lankowski, and we're going to expect you to be able to discuss your piece of creative writing with us. So you'll come in, we'll have about 5 minutes to chat, and we're going to expect you to be ready to talk to us about your process. There's a number of questions in the assessment sheet that give you an idea about the topics that we're going to be discussing with you, but they're not the exact questions. We won't be saying to you explicitly what text influenced your writing and why, but we would expect that you have considered your response to that and you're able to talk to us about what kind of elements in your story were influenced by what we've covered in class. Or marking guidelines talks about sustains an effective ability to communicate orally. So when we're talking about sustained, what we're saying is that we don't want to have to be spending the entire time prompting you. We're going to give you a question, and we would like you to be able to use that as a springboard to give us some detailed insight into what it is that you were doing in your process. We want you to be thinking about what you've done, perhaps have some evidence to be able to talk about, and be able to do that without constantly needing us to give you more information, ask you for more information, and prompt you into some kind of response.
So an effective ability to communicate orally is to be clear, to be organised in your thoughts, and to make your thoughts and your intentions clear to the marker. The second dot point there displays a thoughtful reflection. The reflection is you thinking back on your work and thinking about your intent and your purpose, thinking about your motivation and what stimulated your ideas. And to provide a thoughtful reflection, you need to know it quite well. So you need to have gone through the process of drafting, seeking feedback, editing, crafting, choosing words, experimenting with techniques, so that you can then reflect on how effective that was. And thoughtful means that you have spent some time thinking about it and you can articulate that. Demonstrating an insightful interpretation of the questions, that's talking about the questions that the teacher will ask you on the day, which will come from the questions on your assessment task sheet, but may be different. So we're looking for you listening to what we're asking you, which will probably be derived from what you've told us prior, and interpreting those questions and being able to answer them based on the text that you have written.
Confidence is really key, guys. This isn't expecting you to have a scripted response. It's about you being familiar with what you're saying. Doesn't mean that it has to be a perfect process or the outcome be pure brilliance. This is your opportunity to give us some insight into what was important to you and how you went about trying to communicate.
What we would probably be expecting is that you'd come in to the Viva Voce with something. Now it might be some notes, and those notes might be in table form. What we don't want you to do is answer the questions on the assessment task sheet and bring them in and want to deliver them verbatim. That means word for word. And what we don't want you to do is just come in with your story and be flicking back through your story, looking for evidence and using the story to answer the questions right there in the context of the Viva Voce. You need to know the story fairly well because you've been through that process we talked about before, and you need to have planned your reflection.
So for you, that might be a mind map that breaks up your ideas into different categories. It could be a ticker box shopping list of things that you want to make sure that you discuss with us. It could be some kind of table that you think about, well, what are the forms of features that I use? Utilize that in a way that you can reference it and you can feel comfortable with interacting with it, not that something that's going to hold you back in your discussion. Demonstrates detailed and insightful analysis of how language forms and features are used to convey meaning in texts. In this one, we want to hear about the different techniques that you have had a play with and that you've tried to interact with, and I would expect that that would come from the core text that you've been studying in class. So you might acknowledge that you liked how Carol Ann Duffy used connotation in War Photographer. So you've decided that you're going to take connotation and try and use it in your own story to evoke a particular message or a feeling or an emotion. So you would talk to us about that thought process and then how you applied it to your story, and then have a think about, well, how did I feel like it went? Did it actually achieve my intended purpose? Did it help evoke that feeling or mood or a message?
That's best done if you've got some feedback, because it's really difficult for you to make those decisions about the impact, how successful or how much you've improved in some of the techniques that you're experimenting with, if you haven't had any feedback from your teacher. So it'll really show whether you have done some drafting and planning and you have submitted that for some feedback and whether you're able to take that feedback on. But I'd like to say too, don't forget that the intent and your purpose is to write a piece that evokes emotion and feeling and can put the reader in the situation that you're talking about, so we can see the setting, we can perhaps see the character or feel the character's emotions, and that you're trying to draw us into your story and you are trying to engage us and entertain us in your story. In preparing for your Viva Voce, you've got part B, which is the critical reflection. It'll be about 600 words. You're answering that question: how have you used language, forms and features from the text that you studied in class to write your creative response? That is going to lead you to be able to answer some of the questions that your teacher in the Viva Voce is going to ask you. So a considered response there is going to ensure success in part C. So they all work together. A well-written story, some thorough reflection, some feedback along the way, and then you talk about the process afterwards.
So ultimately, when you're showing up, there's a couple of key things that you want to be utilising your critical reflection to help prompt you for the Viva Voce. So make sure that you know what sort of language forms and features that you try to use. Be ready to give us some examples of those and talk to them. Make sure that you have them highlighted on your page and be able to tell us where your idea came from and what you were hoping to achieve. And think about evaluating how well that you felt that that particular technique went for you. Because that's what we want to hear about. It doesn't matter if it didn't work perfectly. We want to hear about how you engaged with your text beyond, I just wrote it and it kind of came out well. And the more that you have organised your critical reflection, of taken the time to think about these things and bounced ideas off your teacher, it's going to come through and you're going to be much more confident and in responding to the questions that we ask. We're not trying to trick you. This is about trying to give you the opportunity to maximise your marks by telling us and discussing with us. We're not trying to be scary and we're not trying to interrogate you. We want to hear from you and about your ideas.
And I think that's the key. In the 5 minutes, that's going to be you speaking for that time with a few prompts from us, a few questions from us.
If your planning sheet is to the point, then you will be to the point. Okay, so by way of trying to sum this up for you guys, on the 25th, you need to make sure that you show up and you have your creative writing story all nicely, neatly with your name on it ready to go. On a separate sheet of paper, you need to have your critical reflection all ready to be handed in. You need to know when your appointment is. So when your interview is, make sure you check it, triple check it. You need to be in the library 5 minutes before your appointment to make sure that there's no problems there. It is your responsibility. We're not going to come and chase you down. We will give you, your teachers will know that you'll be leaving class, and we will give you a note to get back into class, so you don't need to worry about that. When you show up to your interview, have your organisation sheet there for you so that you know what you would like to talk about and you feel confident with however that looks. You're not being marked on that, so you need to make sure it's something that's going to help you to perform your best on the day.
The teacher that is taking you through the Viva Voce will not have a copy of your creative piece and your reflection. So
we will not have read it either.
Yes, so actually that's a good point. We won't have read that. What we're judging you on is what you tell us about your process, about your intent, about your experimentation, about the impact and about evaluating the impact. So if you come with nothing to your Viva Voce, you will need to go through the process with whatever's in your head.
Dun, dun, dun.
You guys are going to rock it. Don't worry. And we look forward to speaking to you on the day.